All right, you're good to go.
Great. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again virtually here for our meeting of the Distressed Unit Appeal Board. My name is Justin McAdam. I'm the chair of the board. I do want to call this meeting to order and recognize that we have posted the agenda in accordance with the open door law and provided notice as required. We have a number of items of business today. The first one is an approval of a contract that the executive director did with American Eagle Security, LLC. Courtney, would you introduce this item?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, before I do that real quick, I'm just let me run through my normal disclaimers.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm 5 times in, I'm still getting used to it. Go ahead.
That's okay. Just board members and panelists, you all can mute and unmute your lines as needed. Attendees, you are all on mute. If you do encounter any issues, I would just ask that you send me a message in the chat option. And then this meeting is being recorded and we will make it available through our DUAB webpage / our YouTube channel after the meeting. So this will be made publicly available later. So with that, let me jump then to that DUAB Executive Director approval. So since our last meeting, I have done an approval, contract approval, or really a purchase approval for the purchase of certain security equipment to be installed in a number of the different buildings throughout Gary Community School Corporation. The total amount for the purchase is $121,030.50. The equipment that is being installed will allow for more real-time access and transfer of that video to other agencies that may also assist in the event of a security situation, such as Gary Police Department as well as the Lake County Sheriff's Office. A portion of this purchase is being funded through a Homeland Security grant, and then the remainder is being paid through Title I dollars. And this was specifically included in their Title I spending plan for this current year. So with that, I am happy to take questions on this approval, or I'm sure Dr. McNulty can also answer additional questions.
And just as a reminder, we delegated the authority to approve contracts to the executive director up to $250,000. Statute requires us to approve any contract over $30,000. So that's where this is coming from. Are there any questions? Wes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Courtney, is this, I noticed that there were, was there 4 buildings that had a smaller expenditure for this equipment? Is that because they've already been upgraded? Some of their stuff has already been upgraded?
Yes, I believe their their cameras have already been upgraded, and that expenditure is to tie them into the overall real-time system so that they have the same link as the other buildings.
Okay. Does this take care of all of our security needs as far as technology or video is concerned?
I'll let Dr. McNulty address that.
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Are there other questions for Dr. McNulty or Courtney? All right. Seeing none, we don't need any approval on this action. It's just a notice to the board to let us know that it occurred. Our next item of business is an update from Dr. McNulty on the Gary Community Schools. Dr. McNulty?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll give you a couple of quick updates because I know we just met about a week ago, but I'll tell you what's been happening over the last couple of weeks in the district. And one being that we have been still actively meeting with the Gary Health Department. We've been meeting with the Lake County Health Department as a Lake County Superintendent's group, but several of us have a second layer of health departments, and we're one of them. So the Lake Ridge School District and the charter schools and myself have been meeting with the Gary Health Department and Dr. Walker to make sure our reentry plans are good to go for the upcoming school year. And those have all been submitted to their health department, and we are going to be announcing our reentry plans collectively as a group in Lake County on Monday. Dr. Walker has agreed to do Facebook Live messages with myself after Monday for our community to answer questions about health precautions and safety concerns and those types of things. And we're going to do that on an ongoing basis. So I appreciate his help and partnership with that process. We're also in the process of painting and beautifying Westside High School, which we're very excited about. And the next project after Westside will be the Gary Career Center. And we're going to be putting up new banners, paints, painting the lockers, putting up new logos, those types of things, which are desperately needed. So those are already started and will continue throughout the summer. And the anticipated end time for those will be August 5th. So we'll be ready to go for school to start. I did include a picture on your agenda there to show that the team has been busy decorating the city with our yard signs for enrollment. That's one of many, many streets that have been peppered with signs, as well as billboards that have gone up. So it looks fabulous. We're getting lots of traction, lots of attention with our signs and our yard signs. I wanted you to be able to see those because I think they look fabulous. I'm very proud of the team. In addition, our curriculum committee is hard at work on two separate paths, if you will. One is I really feel like we need a 5-year plan for our curriculum committee so that we'll know the plan and mapping out of what we need to replenish our curriculum needs going forward. So we need a book adoption plan. We are in desperate need at some point of updating our science and social curriculum. So we have a committee working this summer to look at some pilot programs for this school year so they can pilot some at some different schools so the committee can come back towards the end of next school year and make some recommendations so we can adopt something going forward. And then we'll look at the next one the following year. We've also partnered with Edgewater and Regional Mental Health for social emotional needs for our families during this pandemic. They have already been seeing some students and families, and they will continue to do counseling and support sessions either as a group or individually as needed. So we did enter into an MOU with both of those facilities. In addition to the science and social studies that I mentioned, the curriculum, I did want to mention that we have reading and math committees that are also working later this month, and we're working really hard on curriculum mapping throughout the district. We've got some pockets of curriculum maps that have been developed, but we don't have a good scope and sequence in curriculum map K through 12. So we have a group of teachers that are grouped together for K to 3rd grade, 4th, 6th, 7th, and 12th grades. So the teachers are very excited about this, and we are as well. So once those plans are done, we will certainly share those with you. We're going to post them on our website as well. We want everybody to have transparency and access to those. And we want, if you're in 3rd grade in this building, the curriculum to look the same as if in 3rd grade in another building across town. We've also partnered with learning.com to assist our students in their keyboarding skills. And we think this is really important since we are giving all the students Chromebooks and all the state assessments are delivered on keyboard, and they need to have keyboarding skills so they can take those tests online. So K through 12 will have a keyboarding curriculum added to their day. Also, we are creating educational videos and documents to train our students on the coronavirus. We've been working again with Edgewater Mental Health, and they're helping us with that, and our social workers, so they can identify symptoms, procedures, et cetera, and also where to go for support services. Lastly, the principals were polled. As a result, they've decided to adopt the continue and expand the iReady formative assessment for the 2020-21 school year. We're going to have the suite of products that will expand from elementary all the way through for our formative assessment. And then lastly, I wanted to discuss and provide to you where we are with the CFO and CAO positions. We are excited to tell you that we did post for the CFO position on April 14th. It was posted for 2 months. We did have 46 applicants apply for the CFO position, which was great. 4 were from Gary, 5 were from Lake County, and the rest were from all over the place. We did end up interviewing 5 applicants for that position. On that interview committee, the committee for that position was comprised of our treasurer, our payroll specialist, and 3 district administrators and myself. And we have chosen a finalist. That person was interviewed after our group by Eric, and that person is from Lake County. Additionally, we did post for the CAO position on June 16th for 2 weeks. We had one applicant, and that applicant also was interviewed by the district office administrative team, and that applicant is from Lake County, and that person also was interviewed separately by Eric later. So we are seeking to move forward with both of these. We did look for both of these people qualifications if they had school budget experience, specifically for the CFO, that they had direct supervision of staff experience and familiar with gateway and audits, et cetera. So we're anxious to get them both on board and filled as soon as possible because, as you are aware, these are key positions within our organization. Yeah.
Great, Dr. McNulty, thank you very much.
Sure.
It sounds like you've been busy even in the last week since we talked to you.
Yes.
I'll start. One question I had going back to the readiness for opening the school year this year. What's the feedback you're hearing from the community, from parents? How do they feel about the information they have so far, and do you feel like your plan is going to address those concerns?
Yeah, well, we haven't rolled out the whole plan to the community as of yet. It'll roll out on Monday.
Right.
I did go on the radio this week and kind of give a framework of the plan, and certainly we've met with the teachers union. We've met with several pockets of people about the plan. We did do a survey for our families as well. And so we feel like, it's going to be well received. We're putting in obviously as many safety precautions as we can in collaboration with the health department. And we are following the same plan as all of the rest of the Lake County superintendents. So obviously we're going to be nimble. That's our term for the year, and we'll adjust the plan as needed. But I think parents are anxious to get their students back in school.
Great, thank you. One piece before we move to other questions, one piece I do want to touch on, Dr. McNulty mentioned the CAO and CFO positions. You'll recall that at the beginning of our engagement here under DUAB, the statute required the state to approve the hiring of those positions, in part because we approved the pay for those positions and actually covered the salaries of those positions for the first couple of years of the engagement. That is no longer the case. The CAO and CFO positions have shifted to be entirely local positions at this point, so that they are that the pay is covered exclusively by the school corporation itself. However, our contract does still have a requirement, and I want to bring this to the board's attention, has a requirement that we're to approve the filling of those positions, not necessarily the people for those positions, but the authority for Gary Community Schools to fill those positions. As we looked through that piece of the contract, Courtney and I were of the opinion, and in consultation with board counsel, that piece of the contract is really targeted at ensuring that we had appropriate oversight for purposes of covering the compensation for those individuals. And so we've made the judgment, but I'm open to hearing any concerns from the board, that we don't need to continue to approve the filling of those positions in the way that we had, because the reasons for that are no longer the same. So with that, I just wanted to make that clear to the board. And if there's any questions about that, happy to take that. All right, hearing none on that, are there other questions for Dr. McNulty?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Representative Smith, please.
Yeah. How are you doing today?
Good, good.
My first question is, why the shift? Did not the law indicate that the state was supposed to pay for those two positions? Why has it been shifted to the local budget? Yeah,
so the law actually specified, and Courtney can give me knows the exact dates, but I believe it was through 2008, through the 2018, the end of 2018 school year, that we were to pay for the CAO and CFO, and then that was set explicitly in the law then to revert back to the school corporation. Courtney, did I get those dates right?
No, it was actually through June 30th of 2019
June 30th,
that those positions were paid by DUAB.
And then they reverse.
And then they reverted back to the Gary Community School Corporation, yes.
That's right.
Okay. I have a question I need to ask of Mrs. Dr. McNulty, if I may.
Yeah, please.
In your fourth bullet under your accomplishments, you have a sentence that says our curriculum committee is working on a 5-year plan to establish what our future curriculum needs may be to allow us to be able to plan accordingly for each adoption. What do you mean by each adoption? Are you talking about textbook adoptions?
Yes, we're talking about textbook adoption so that we can say, this year we're going to adopt math, for example. Next year we want to adopt reading. Next year science and social studies, so that we have a plan, and that every 5 years that we are up to date with some new curriculum, because we haven't done that in a while.
Are you letting the textbook drive your curriculum, or are you establishing the curriculum and selecting the textbook? Because it seems like the way this is worded, that you're letting the adoption drive the curriculum. Normally, corporations develop a curriculum and they find a textbook.
Right, we're adopting, that's why we're doing the curriculum maps in tandem, because we want to do the curriculum mapping and then find textbooks that fit that.
Okay. You're talking about the CFO. What role does sender and sender? I just found out about that yesterday. What role does sender and sender play with all of the financial matters?
Sender and Sender has been filling in the financial management firm in the interim while we've been seeking a CFO.
And so once you get a CFO, then their services will be terminated?
We will not need their services. We might need them for consultation on a few outlying issues, but we anticipate not to be using them like we are now.
Where is Sender and Sender based? I had never heard of it.
I'm not sure where their office is based out of, but I know that they represent, for example, Gary, the city of Gary, and I know that they represent many, many school districts.
So it's a local firm?
Yes.
I'll jump in on this one. They're based out of Maryville. They're right by Broadway and 30.
Okay. On the yard signs that are out, and I commend you for getting them out. Are you aware that as you're driving by, you can't read the small print? I mean, all you can see is read Gary Community Schools pretty much when you're driving by, unless you get out and stop.
No, not aware, and I've driven all around the city. I was able to see them. I thought they looked great.
Yeah, they're aesthetic to the eye, but you can't read the copy. I don't know if you plan to do more, but I would suggest reverses. They help you to see a smaller print.
Okay, thank you for the feedback.
In addition to that, who's putting out the sign?
Our FACE liaisons are putting out the signs, and some of those student ambassadors.
Okay, can I make
mostly our FACE liaisons.
What I'm seeing, and I'm all over the city. They're not all over the city. They're in clusters. You may go on one block and there's 20 signs in one block, and then you don't see any more in that area. That's not the wise distribution of signs. I'm willing to volunteer and help with those for nothing, just to get them out in the proper place, because I do a lot of promotions.
I would love that. I'll take you up on that. I got a couple boxes in my office.
Okay, I'll take them. I've got some idle time. I'm finally free with my classes for the summer, and got our CAPE report in, so I have a few hours.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
That's all the questions I had of Dr. McNulty.
Great. Thank you, Representative Smith. Are there other questions from the board for Dr. McNulty? All right. Hearing none, we'll move to our next item of business today. Our next item of business is a consideration of an operating referendum to authorize Gary Community Schools to proceed with the referendum process. I believe we have Eric Parrish with us to present on that issue.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Eric Parrish with MGT. In your packet today is an outline of the conversation about an operating referendum, and I'll go through that outline in order. If you have questions, please stop me. As long as we cover all the material, it doesn't matter how we get there, just so we cover all the material. As Chairman McAdam said, we are asking for consideration of an operating referendum for the November of 2020 ballot. And the reason is the deficit is still in place at Gary Community Schools. There's been progress made toward reducing that deficit to getting to a balanced budget, but we're not there. And an operating referendum is the most direct and clear path to a balanced budget, which would position Gary Community Schools to end distressed unit status. November of 2020 is the best chance for a successful referendum in that it is a high turnout election. It's a presidential election year. There are more voters traditionally, historically, in a presidential election, and a referendum is typically won on turnout, and this would be the best chance with the highest turnout for the referendum. If we look forward, 2021, an off year, most likely a referendum on a 21 ballot would be a single issue. So not only is the cost higher to operate an election in an off year like that, typically the turnout is significantly lower and has a much lower chance of success. The next election cycle is 2022, and either primary or general election is either 22 or 29 months away, which is where we're at is a significant amount of time between here and there. The reasons to support an operating referendum on November of 2020 ballot, number one is to increase teacher compensation. The first $1 million of an operating referendum would go to Gary Community School teachers who have not had a raise in more than a decade. They were granted a stipend last year. That was the first compensation increase in over a decade, but this would be a legitimate salary increase for all of our classroom teachers. The other reasons to support a referendum are additional or increased opportunities for students, preschool, activities, arts, athletics, things that enhance the student experience. And the third is upgrade safety and security. And Mr. Bennett, you asked about in the EM report, would those security purchases satisfy all of the security concerns? I separate the use of an operating referendum funding different than capital needs. And when we talk about security and safety in an operating referendum, it's about students. It's social and emotional learning. It's about mental health and counselors. The services that not just in pandemic time, but in any time, all students benefit from. And finally, it balances the budget. It will get us over the finish line with a bit of a reserve to carry forward, as every school district needs to have, and put us in a position to end distressed unit status, which I think everyone is in favor of. One thing I would add to all of that is that every dollar contemplated to be spent will be accounted for both before, during, and after a referendum. The exact plan on where the dollars will go to teachers and students and how those dollars will be spent will be made very public on an ongoing basis. And then as the dollars come in, there'll be a strict accounting for what was pledged and then where those dollars are spent. The reasons to oppose an operating referendum are not unique to Gary. These are oppositions that any school district would face, and not just in Indiana, but across the country. Number one, it increases taxes. That's what a referendum does. It asks local citizens to contribute to the local school district, and taxes would increase. And second, and again, this is universal. Now, Gary's unique in distressed unit status, but there's a universal distrust when taxpayers are talking about a tax increase. There's a distrust of the entity that is requesting the funds and a distrust of how those funds will be spent. There's an extra layer with state takeover, but that's, again, a universal situation that's inherent in any referendum. Part of that solution for both of those is ending distressed unit status. It's our quickest and clearest path. You'll hear me say that time and time again. Gary Community Schools has held operating referendums in the recent years. The most recent was 2016 before distressed unit status. That was 4 years ago and lost by just over 300 votes. There was a campaign. The folks that I've talked to, this is pre-state takeover and my involvement. There was a campaign. We anticipate a more robust campaign that will help not only message what the reasons are to support a referendum, but where those dollars go, which is what I've been told we're missing from that past campaign that narrowly lost. Based on our calculations on a tax rate of 44 cents on each $100 of assessed valuation on the average homestead in Gary proper, that would amount to about 16 cents per day on the average homestead, and on the average business about 47 cents per day for the life of the referendum, which could go up to 8 years. I want to stress and emphasize the reporting of the funds, how those funds would be spent in advance, and then once the funding starts, where those funds go is a cornerstone and paramount to the referendum. Every dollar will be identified in advance and then accounted for along the way. There'll be complete transparency. In your packet is some milestones of the steps that we've taken. We've talked with campaign referendum experts to give us some guidance to help us to disseminate the information in front of us. We've engaged with community leaders. Those folks have asked for anonymity, which we'll grant. We'll continue to outreach and engage with other community leaders and community stakeholders across the board to get input and feedback. We're talking with DUAB today. We'll have ongoing consultations with campaign experts as well as others throughout the community. A decision is due in July. The ballot question is submitted to DLGF for approval, which has to be granted on or before August 1st in the referendum for November 20. And one more thing before we turn over for questions. We were here, it just seems a few days ago, and in fact, I think it was, our last meeting with DUAB where the 1065, HEA 1065, which is the School Improvement Fund, was the main topic of financial consideration. For a reminder, that was $25 million fund that is $25 million being diverted out of common school loan repayment and coming back into Gary Community Schools. I want to make it very clear, those funds are for buildings and boilers, playgrounds, and pools. Those are on things. That money cannot be spent on teachers or students. It's very restricted, and it's very helpful. It's very beneficial, but it all goes to buildings. A referendum does not go to buildings. It goes to people. It goes to our students. It goes to our classroom teachers. It goes to our staff. Just want to make that very clear that those two things are running parallel but do not intersect, and they would serve two very unique and very specific needs. And to summarize again, as documented in the deficit reduction plan, which was submitted in January of 2018, and we have lived by since to bring the deficit from where it was to where it is, this has been a cornerstone in that deficit reduction plan, and to where we are today, it is, again, the most clear and direct path to get to a balanced budget with a surplus, as every school district needs, and position Gary Community Schools to end distress unit status. With that, I'll answer questions.
Eric, thank you very much. You know, I think the first question that comes to mind, I know you and I have had this conversation already, and we've spent a lot of time talking about it, but I think it's helpful for everyone to hear this, and that is, with everything that's going on, we're in the midst of a pandemic. We're heading into a difficult economic situation. Why now? Why is this the right time to do it?
Yeah, absolute question. Great question. It's on the top of mind of everyone, not just in Gary or Indiana, across the country. A couple of things. One, the presidential election is the highest turnout, and this referendum is the foundation for success, is the highest turnout election. Pandemic notwithstanding, people are still going to vote, and we need votes. Second, that the need for Gary Community Schools is acute. There's not an indefinite time frame to reach a balanced budget to petition to end distress unit status. There's been no stated time frame. That's to make that very clear. There's nothing that's been told to me or MGT or anybody else, but I just know it's not indefinite. And so the combination of where we're at, where we've been, and where we want to be in the time frame, this is the right time to do it. I would also point backward slightly to June. 18 school districts, I've got my numbers right, going by memory, across Indiana asked for referendums, and 16 succeeded in the height of pandemic. And in fact, I would say even more uncertainty looking backwards than where we're at today. And certainly October, November, nobody has a crystal ball that's going to say where we are then. It changes daily. But I look back, there's a sense of normalcy, and maybe I'm overstating it, maybe it's just my own perception, that we're normalizing this new strange time versus back in April and May when things were more in flux, it seems like. So with the success of those, and if we do everything we need to do in messaging and promote that message, I do believe November 20th is the right time.
And I think as we've talked through it, realistically, the next time that there would be an election for which it would make sense to hold a referendum, the congressional elections 2 years away are a possibility, though probably not a very good one. And so in reality, it's really looking at the next presidential election in 2024 before we could really think about doing a referendum again with any chance of success. Is that your estimation?
Yeah, I would hedge a bit on any chance of success. I think the eternal optimist that I am, but I think a better chance of success, and I just throw a word in there, significantly or much significantly higher chance of success. Definitely. I think 21 with an off year, and let me pause real quick. A referendum is an uphill climb. I don't want to paint an unrealistic picture. It's going to be a lot of work. I totally believe it's doable, and I believe it will be successful, but it will take a lot of work. 21, that's a much steeper hill with a much bigger rock that you're rolling up a much steeper hill. And 22, slightly less steep. And do my math, 2024, that's 4 years away. I'm not sure the timeline we have an operating deficit, and that without some major considerations, that would continue for however many years into the future before a referendum was held.
And so in that time period, I mean, if we're running a deficit of $6 million a year, if we did nothing else, we're going to increase the debt by $25 million just, and probably more than that, before we actually could get to a place where we would be balanced.
Yeah, and I think the actions that we've taken, the initiatives that we've taken through the Viable Deficit Reduction Plan will continue. We've seen those reductions take place and yield results, and some of those will continue to yield results into the future, but they will plateau at some point. And we've done very well at cutting costs, but costs at some point will start to increase. We can't go another 10 years without giving teachers some compensation change. That's just not realistic. Utility costs, which are after benefits and salaries and transportation, those are our 4 biggest costs. I think it's safe to assume all of those costs go up in the future and not go down. So it just, the deficit would continue. We would have to continue to accumulate debt, take on debt to serve the deficit. And that's a cycle that would continue for as long as that lasted before a referendum were to pass. And I'm not sure anybody's up for that.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to estimate what the appetite is for that from the state legislator's perspective, but eventually there will be concern, I think, of continuing that. Can you speak to, and then I'll yield to others for questions after this, but one other important question that I think we've spent a lot of time talking about, but I'd like to hear you explain it here. If we don't do a referendum, or if the referendum, if you don't proceed with a referendum at this time, and a referendum doesn't pass, or a referendum doesn't pass, and the directive is balance the budget anyway, what does it take to get to a balanced budget in, say, 2 to 3 years?
So there's two levers you can pull to balance a budget. One lever is to increase revenue, and the second lever is to decrease costs. We've done a lot of decreasing costs, and I've said this the first day I was in Gary, and people have heard me say it many times. No organization cuts its way to prosperity. We have to grow, and enrollment is by far our priority, and we see the campaign and we've stabilized the loss of students, but it has to grow. The referendum is the opportunity to grow revenue quickly in a very clear, direct way with a very minor impact on individuals and businesses within Gary. What it would look like to balance the budget without a referendum means there's more of the lever of reducing costs and less of the lever increasing revenue. There's just a limited number of opportunities to increase revenue. And attendance and enrollment, as even if it were to grow, could not grow at a pace fast enough to close that deficit where we're at in a significant short time frame. And so to balance it, if the mandate were to be given, and let me be very clear, I've never gotten that mandate, but if referendum were to fail or not to be held, and the mandate was given to balance the budget, it would lean more on the levers of reducing costs.
And it seems like that's going to be detrimental in two ways. One, as you highlighted, that's going to make it harder to recruit students to the district because it's going to limit the offerings that you're going to be able to make available. But the other is also, at some point, it will start to impact the ability to offer robust academic services across the district.
Right. Yes. You think of, and school districts are facing these decisions that aren't in a deficit mode, and they're really hard decisions that are agonizing and directly impactful on the community. You compound this in Gary with a deficit on top of these types of decisions wrapped around current economic situations, and it's a double hit. Yes, it is. We start with what is absolutely essential, and that's off limits, but everything around that, which is arts and athletics and activities and the enhancements for the school life of students, those things become the things on the edges that you have to look at reducing in order to reach that balanced budget. It's not something folks want to contemplate, but that's reality.
Thank you. Mr. Joyce, I see that you've raised your hand.
Hi, Eric. The school corporation did receive a settlement from U.S. Steel, correct? How does that settlement affect moving forward? How does it affect the deficit? How does it affect the overall balances? And what's the intended use for those funds? And does that impact the need at all for a referendum or the ongoing continuity for the school corporation?
Absolutely. So let me give some context and then go through the answers. So almost a year ago, U.S. Steel made a payment to the City of Gary, Gary Community Schools, and the Library District. The share of that payment that came to Gary Community Schools was just under $4 million. The net proceeds was just under $4 million. That payment is a one-time payment, and in simple terms, I'm oversimplifying, but for the conversation, U.S. Steel made a deal that they would invest in a plant in Gary, and make this one-time payment to the city, to the schools, and the library district in lieu of property taxes on the investment for the next 20 years. So let me flip that around and say, in lieu of paying property taxes on an increased investment over the next 20 years, having a revenue stream, U.S. Steel made a deal to pay in advance and essentially a discounted amount. So a one-time payment that is in lieu of property tax revenue that would extend over 20 years. So that's the context of the payment. So there is we set that money aside in a separate fund. It's sitting there today. It has to be prudently spent because over the next 20 years, we will not be receiving what we would have received in increased property tax on that investment. So in that regard, it actually, I think it's fair to say, hurts the deficit in the long term. There will be less money received over 20 years because of this one-time payment. And if we were to spend that one-time payment today to pay down the deficit, we could document and show that the deficit is less in one fiscal year. But over time, that's not systemic. That's not balancing the budget. That systemic imbalance would come right back, and there'd be no other one-time payment to help offset it. So it's sitting in a separate fund. It is right now what I call our catastrophe fund. We're operating in a deficit. Every school district should have some type of reserve account for catastrophe. Our buildings are going through some rehab now, which is much needed, but prior to the school improvement fund, if the roof at Westside or a boiler at Bailey went out, we would be scrambling to try to make those repairs and keep schools open. That $4 million is sitting there in case of a catastrophe like that. If we were to spend it today, and then one of those events were to happen, which is not unrealistic, we would not have the means to make that immediate repair or replacement and keep those schools open. Long term, with 1065, we have the ability to take some of that out of what I have termed the catastrophe fund. But until 1065 is up and running and those initial vital immediate needs are met, our plan is to keep it in the catastrophe fund until we're safely away from a catastrophe and start to build up a legitimate reserve. And then, and only then, can we use that money for its intended purpose, which is over the 20-year time frame.
Okay, thank you. Also, when you were talking earlier and you were talking about the plan moving forward, and you talked about having discussions with the community, what kind of discussions do you intend to have? I mean, are they going to be in interactive forums so the community can, express their concerns, whether it be oppositions or favors for? Unfortunately, most of the time you do get oppositions at the meetings like this, and not really, I want to stand in favor, and then that's the end of the conversation. So basically, you have to hear and discuss the opposition. So, given the environment that we're in, which is a difficult environment, how do we communicate with the community so they do feel involved in the process moving forward?
Yeah, to the first part's easy, the second part's harder. The first part is, do we engage? And absolutely. Our first level of engagement would be with what I would deem top community leaders in pejorative way, just the highest profile, better way to say it, community leaders, and that is what we're contemplating, why we're contemplating it, what the options are, what the consequences are, up or down. Beyond that, and I think it's what you're speaking to, is the community itself. And we have to educate people on the situation we're at, why we're asking for this slight increase in property taxes, and where the money would go, and why it's essential to say yes. That's any campaign, and that's what I would deem it retail politicking. I mean, it's a campaign, and there's a reason it's called a campaign. You're trying to persuade people. That's the easy part, because absolutely, we have to do that. We will do that. The harder part is how we do that. In non-pandemic world, it's door to door and community, neighbor to neighbor, and church member to church member. that's limited, so our creativity will be tested on how we get that message out. One of the most key important ways is the employees that we have within Gary Community Schools that will benefit directly from this. They become, use the term, foot soldiers in the effort to spread the news. From there, we'll ask for other volunteers to participate, as other campaigns have done in Gary in the past and happened in other communities. It's the door-to-door retail part that's going to be the challenge, and we just have to overcome that in creativity with phone banking and Zoom meetings and the ways that we can meet with people and get that word out.
Thank you, Eric. Are there other questions from board members, other comments? Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I look at this proposal and think about from the state's perspective, there's our desire to keep various schools under state control. I think all would agree that in the ideal and best world, the people in Gary are the ones that are overseeing the Gary School Corporation. All agree on that. I know from, at least from one legislator, I think from many others, we need and must have fiscal stability, a balanced budget, and at least the proposal laid out as I see it is very workable. If this will pass, it'll be a path then to put people in Gary back in complete control of the Gary School Corporation. And so I would hope we'd at least consider that this is, I think, a very viable option. And this going forward, obviously, it's an explained time frame and why it's important now. And I know that one thing that Dr. Smith and I can definitely agree on, that education is paramount for young people. And we want the very best, I can assure you, the very best for the young people who live in the Gary School Corporation. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. And I think to your point around the importance of education, we've seen that throughout, even through this pandemic and through these difficult times from a financial perspective for the state and economically, the governor and the legislature has committed to maintain funding for schools during this period of time. And so in a time when most other programs at the state are being asked to tighten their belts and being asked to find areas for savings, the priority has been ensuring that school corporations receive the full amount of money that we have allocated to them, and as much as possible to protect those dollars, because we recognize not only are they going to face additional challenges here that others will not face in educating children and additional expenses that come with that, but these expenditures are investments in the future, and they're things that we need to be doing year in and year out. And if you don't make the investment, you can't reap the dividend. Are there other questions and comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I ask to be recognized.
Yes, Representative Smith.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you a question before I get into the issue of the referendum. Mr. Parrish mentioned the $4 million from the United States still. Will it require DUAB's approval if they touch those dollars? Because I don't want it to become a slush fund for MGT.
Yeah, I actually, my understanding is that those funds are treated like other funds of the district. There aren't special restrictions on those funds that I'm aware of. And so with that, I would imagine that I would expect that our oversight is the same as it is for all of the funds at Gary Schools, and will be handled similarly. Eric, is there additional context you can provide on that? Are there any other restrictions on those funds that we should be aware of?
No, they were receipted in just like any other revenue source, even though it was a one-time receipt. There's no restrictions. We did purposely set it aside into a special fund, so it would not be commingled with operating, education fund, what used to be called the general fund. it is set aside for complete transparency.
So the state has two silos, and so they're not in either silo, so you can use them in either of the two silos?
Theoretically, there's no restriction.
I mean, I think,
There's no restriction.
okay, no restrictions, and that makes it even more subject to a slush fund. And
Well,
I'm not saying that you're going to use it that way, but that's the connotation it has if it's just a rainy day fund that you can use for whatever you need, that you see is emergency, a band-aid approach to the use of the money versus a plan to funnel so many dollars into each ensuing operational year.
yeah. Yeah, so let me backtrack and repeat, because I think it is very important. Prior to the School Improvement Fund 1065, which just came about, there was no contingency plan if the roof at West Side blew off, which was not unrealistic assumption, or the boiler at Bailey went out, which is not an unrealistic assumption. Operating a deficit, there was not funds set aside to make those replacements and keep those schools open. The U.S. Steel money became that backstop to keep schools open.
Okay, but
now 1065 is in place and those repairs can be made. That frees up one of those requirements that we put on that fund.
And Eric, I do think the one restriction that those funds do have is that they are property tax funds. And so like all of your other property tax funds, they're subject to all of the same oversight and controls from the state level, from Wes's Department of Local Government and Finance, and from Paul's Board of Accounts, that they're subject to those similar controls and oversights in terms of how you use them and how you account for them.
Absolutely. And that's why, again, we set a separate fund, created a fund just for that money. So it wasn't mingled in the education or what used to be the general fund. So it would not be lost. It would not be, it could be traced once the money is spent. It's very apparent where it is and where it would go.
Well, I would be concerned about the transparency every time that fund is tapped, that the community know that you're tapping it, so that when you leave in 2 years, hopefully, that what we'll have is not a fund that disappeared and nobody knows what happened to it.
Yeah, I can pledge that transparency will exist, that every dollar, once it's spent, where it goes. And there's been consternation in Gary with the $4 million. Why don't we spend it today? Again, it has to, the intent was to cover property tax revenue that would have extended over 20 years that will not be received.
Okay, my next question is, do you have a written out plan of how you're going to proceed with this referendum, with the campaign?
We have an outline of a plan, yes, we have. It's a bit premature to say exactly here's the plan. We've got to go through this process and get the ballot language approved. But yes, we've been working for months on what it would look like in an outline form, and the details once it's time will be included.
Okay, so you say you have an outline. Is it in writing?
It is.
Okay, could the board be privy to that outline?
I don't. I have to look at it before I commit. I don't know if there's any what would be confidential, or I can't imagine that there is, but I don't have it committed to memory. With redactions, perhaps, but yes, there's no reason. It's a campaign. No reason not.
Okay, let me ask you a question. How many of the students have we captured, or I hate to use that word capture, how many have we been able to attract from the Roosevelt program that was under Edison Learning?
Yeah, I do not have that number in front of me.
I asked that question before, and I was told that you do not have the answer. And when am I going to get the answer? School starting, and it's too late to do anything about it.
I will email that to you today. I have those numbers in my office, Dr. Smith.
Okay, thank you. Let me just indicate that all of you should have received, it came late at night, a document that where some citizens, at least of the west side of Gary, have indicated their desire to postpone this referendum or the decision to authorize the referendum. Have all of you seen that or not?
I have seen it, and I've reviewed it.
Okay, it has a lot of content in it, and I won't tell you that I've mastered it because I didn't get it till I happened to get up at late last night and go to my computer, and I saw it. I didn't get it till about 11 o'clock our time, which would have been 12 o'clock Eastern time for Indianapolis. But it does raise some concerns in it. I haven't mastered all of it, and I think it warrants us looking at it. What I have heard from just listening to the radio and from talking to a few people in the community is that they felt that we needed to have a public hearing on the matter prior to the approval by this board of this referendum. I support the referendum, so I'm not trying to stop it. I support it because I'm willing to give more for my schools, even though I don't have any beneficiaries of the educational project other than indirectly, if my city is healthy educationally, then that means that I'm living in a better community, and so I get some indirect benefits from it. But I don't have any children or any grandchildren that are part of the school corporation. But one of the things that we have to do is learn from our past, and some of the mistakes that we made in the past, we should not make them again. And the people are asking for this. And if you want to get that support, I think we ought to do, if you want to win that support, I think we ought to do everything we can and not make the mistakes we made in the past of not proceeding with this in an organized fashion. And I can assure you the last two campaigns were not organized, or I should say poorly organized. And so I'm suggesting that if it's just a week or if it's 2 weeks, I don't think it's going to make any difference in the outcome, that we ought to have this chance for citizens to have some input into this process before this board approves this referendum effort.
So, Representative Smith, I do want to provide a little context in terms of the timing of where we stand. And so we're up against a very tight deadline to be able to do a couple of, well, not we, but the team at Gary Schools is up against a very tight deadline to be able to go through all of the steps that they need to go through to be able to position themselves to have the question on the ballot in time for the election. I believe, yeah, I believe the deadline for having the question on the ballot is it August 1st or August 3rd? It's first. It's August 1st. And so before that can happen, certainly one of the big steps is that DLGF has to receive the question, review the question, approve the question. That is a process in and of itself. And then, of course, getting through the process of getting it to the ballot. And so with that in mind, I think we're running short on time to hold a hearing before this board can make a decision. But I don't know that it's impracticable, and I will defer to Eric here to hold their own kind of listening session about the referendum to learn. I suspect that's already part of the plan. Maybe not timed the way that you proposed, but certainly to hear from the community, address concerns of the community, and make the case to the community. So it might be that the more appropriate way to handle that, given the timing constraints that we have, is to look to MGT to take on that burden as they go through this process.
Well, I certainly think if you can proceed with the paperwork, so you can be ready, you can always withdraw the request before the first. However, I do think that we must allow this community an opportunity to speak on this issue prior to the final decision being made. And I think that's and honestly as I can say.
Yeah.
Justin, if I can jump in here on just a kind of an administrative point. So for today's purposes for DUAB, what our action would be if we so choose to take that, our action would be to authorize Gary School Corporation to pursue a referendum, an operating referendum, if they so choose, or if they determine that that is appropriate. This is somewhat similar to the way that we've handled like bond refundings in the past, where DUAB is not the entity that's ultimately signing that final resolution, but we basically give them the go-ahead to move forward with it when it's appropriate to do so. So kind of thinking through, while I do think from the standpoint of trying to get this group together again, may be difficult, but I kind of would echo some of Justin's thoughts there that locally there may be more flexibility for that. And while today opens the door for Gary Schools to move, or would open the door for Gary Schools to move towards an operating referendum, ultimately Gary Schools will still have to make that final decision on walking through that door.
With all due respect, we have called meetings in a 2-week period and been able to do that. We have 3 weeks between now and August 1st. I certainly am not a voting member, and I really don't have any clout or power with this board. All I am is a voice for the people. I'm telling you what the community is asking for. If you refuse to abide by their request and go on and approve it, then your will be done. But I suggest a better way is for us to do what I suggested, which the community is asking for. If Plan A doesn't work, then Plan B would fall on Eric, Mr. Parrish, and the whole MGT operation to make that happen. But I do think it needs to happen, and it needs to be given some credence. It should not just be a step, a necessary step without any purpose.
Eric, can you speak a little bit to one of the things that I'm particularly reluctant about at the moment? I hear you, Representative Smith. Right? I think in an ideal world, it would be with this request here on the table and in front of us, it would be optimal to be able to hold that public hearing before we would go through that decision. That hasn't worked out in this particular instance because of the number of issues that we've dealt with here in the last 2 months. But the issue that's concerning me in my mind as I think about that is that we don't have the benefit of legal counsel here who knows the ins and outs of the process and precisely what has to be done to get us from point A to point B. And I would not want to risk jeopardizing the opportunity to position Gary Schools have that opportunity to present the referendum in doing so. And so I think to your point on Plan B, perhaps that's the more practical option based on where we are at the current moment. And so I wonder if, Eric, could you speak a little bit to your thoughts on what Dr. Smith is proposing and whether that is something that fits within your approach?
Sure. And I agree with what you just laid out. The deadline, let me start with this statement. The community has the ultimate say in a referendum. There's a vote. There's an election held, and every citizen registered to vote will vote yes or no. And it's incumbent upon us to make a persuasive argument to vote yes. But for community engagement, there's no issue that has more community engagement than an election. Working backwards in the pragmatic side of the ballot question, the deadline is August 1st. The submission process is 10 days for approval. Now, I think DLGF, and I think we have a person we could go to if we needed some expedited request, but it's a 10-day process to submit the question to get to approval. So that's the 21st, which is 10 days away, notwithstanding weekends, which there's 2 in between. The time, and I would, to Justin's point, I would hate to lose an opportunity for the clearest, most direct path to a balanced budget and lose that opportunity on a technicality that we didn't cross the T's and dot the I's. That we didn't follow the procedure and we missed a deadline when we knew that we could have met that deadline. That's paramount. So, but to the greater point, the way the referendum will succeed is through engagement. That if we just announced that there's a referendum and we said the election is November 3rd, please vote yes, I guarantee it's going to fail. And I don't have a vested interest in the outcome other than succeeding Gary Community School. And so it is incumbent on everyone involved to make sure that the referendum is a success, and to do that, it requires deep engagement every day between the ballot approval and the election. That will happen.
Yeah, let me just indicate or reiterate what I said before, and that was that you proceed with the process, but you still hold that hearing so people have a chance to express themselves because they're asking for that. That is part of the engagement process. Now, certainly, there's a course that I teach you at the university. It's called School Community Relations. There's a whole chapter on what's called public campaigns. And so I teach that. So I understand the process of doing that. But I'm suggesting to you, for Gary, that's a necessary step. Now, I have no power. I have no clout. I'm just a voice crying in the wilderness. But I'm saying to you, if you want the support of this community, you are to address all of the things that could be areas of resistance to your quest. The question is, what do you want and how badly you want it? If you want it badly enough, you'll do what's necessary to get it. And I am strongly suggesting that. Now, you can do what you want to, because I can't make you do anything. But I am more than suggesting to you, I'm urging you to do it.
Yeah, I think it's important that we listen. I mean, as we've had a lot of conversations about this, certainly over the last several months, listening to the community is paramount. It's certainly something we as a board try to do, and something we want to get better at. We have an agenda item later today on that very topic of allowing public comment. And so I do understand your concern. I want to make sure that we are sensitive to the timeline and the logistics that MGT has laid out, and I would want to make sure that we are imperiling the ability to get that process completed on time and without any hiccups.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Wes.
Thank you. Far be it from me to coach Dr. Smith on campaigns, but I've been in around a few, and I can't disagree with what he says. So really what we're talking about is the timing, and I think that these can both be done in parallel. We're certainly going to turn this around if we decide to allow Gary Schools to hold the referendum, so we will certainly turn that question around quickly. But I think these things can work in tandem, and they can work in parallel with one another. But as I try to look at this from the many perspectives that are going on up there, if and from what we're hearing and what I'm hearing is that the folks and the citizens, the parents, and the community want their school back, this is the most direct route. It's been said time and time again, and I agree with that. So I'm going to support this. With the understanding that the parents are going to be involved. We want the parents involved, and they are going to have the ultimate say through the referendum process, but they're also going to have the ability to get involved. And I hope that they get involved in a positive nature. As anyone that knows me, they know that a tax increase is not my first go-to problem solver, and we haven't done that in this case. We have waited 3 years to get to this point. to try to get other things to work, and they have to a certain degree. But I think we all knew going in that ultimately we were not going to be able to turn over this Gary school community back to the city and to the residents of Gary unless we get this across the finish line. So I hope not only do the taxpayers and the parents up there, but I also hope that the local elected leaders up there will get behind this in a vocal way, in a positive way, so that we can turn this back to we can turn over Gary schools back to the community up there in the next couple of years. So I'm going to support this, and with the understanding that the campaign needs to be successful, but we need to move forward so that we don't miss this important deadline, because I can't, if this comes across my desk at August 2nd, there's nothing I can do about it. And I will just finish by saying it's not unprecedented for a community or for a school corporation to submit a request and then withdraw it. So there will be time for the feedback from the community, and if they don't want this, then they could be withdrawn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Wes. Are there other questions or comments regarding this topic or the referendum more generally? Eric, are there, in terms of how you plan to proceed on the referendum and in terms of the community engagement side of that question, can you walk us through just at a high level what that will look like as you go forward? Obviously, a campaign is one that is about timing in a certain respect, because if you start too early, people forget your message by the time it's time for them to make a decision. And so I understand that, probably a lot of this activity is something that would occur closer in time to the actual time to vote. But could you touch on that a little bit, just overall what that strategy would look like?
Yeah, and I think it starts sooner rather than later. Well, I know it does. And certainly as you get closer to the election day, the intensity is higher, but really it starts now. The day that, 2 days ago, when the agenda was posted and the word referendum was on the agenda, it is incumbent on us to frame the message to say why a citizen would vote to increase his or her taxes to support the school district and where that money would go. And that's not an October initiative. That is a July initiative to start that message and to reinforce that message all the way through. And there's certainly election fatigue that we need to be aware of. But because this is a retail campaign, it is person to person, and as I said before, church member to church member, and grocery shopper to grocery shopper, and neighbor to neighbor. That doesn't happen only in October. And I don't disagree with Dr. Smith and anything you've said about community engagement. And it's not a and or, it's a yes and. It is yes, we will engage, and yes, we can engage sooner, and yes, we can engage even in July and say why did we request the referendum consideration? How will the money be spent? Why is it essential to get to a balanced budget? Rather than starting that after the ballot language was approved and the resolution could be passed, we can start that sooner. It's no different than what was contemplated other than a few days sooner. But Chairman, to your point, it is an always on, 24/7 message to say, here's why it is so important for the health of the community, the health of the school district, the long-term viability and sustainability. That is the message, and it has to be always on.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Representative Smith.
Yes. I try to keep my ear to the ground, and one of the things is when the concept of the referendum became known to this community again a couple of days ago, as Eric indicated, there's been all kind of speculations about it, all kind of comments. Most of them have been negative. And one of the things I teach, and I'm not trying to take all of you to my classroom, I'm not trying to make you my students, but one of the things I teach in the school community relations class is you fight rumors with facts. If you jump ahead of this before you start even putting it out there, then you get some facts out there, so people are going to talk. They're either going to talk about the truth, or they're going to make up the truth. It won't be truth, but they'll make it up. And so I'm saying to you, learn that there's all kinds of research out there how you deal with these campaigns. And I'm telling you, regardless of whether you choose not to act on this now and give them the authorization, I think that he needs to. MGT needs to have that meeting post haste, because otherwise it's going to be harder to fight those rumors that are going to be out there about this whole referendum.
Yeah, Dr. Smith, I agree. It's important that we get in front of the community, that MGT get in front of the community at the beginning. They've got to make the case. It's a complicated situation. It is a complex set of facts in terms of understanding the finances of the district and how we got here and where we're going. Eric, I wonder, in listening to this, as we've had this conversation, and I think the point is well taken, and certainly I know that I hear you saying you want to be engaged with the community. Is it possible for you to meet this need, to meet this expectation, and be able to hold a public forum of sorts on this question before you make the final decision to request that it be placed on the ballot? Is that a possibility?
It is. I don't have the calendar in front of me for July as far as opportunities to do that, but yes, I mean, the short answer is yes, and we can do that.
And that would be an opportunity then for not only for citizens to ask questions and get those facts that I think Dr. Smith is right to point we need to give, but also an opportunity for you to really lay it out in a more general context for the community at large, those who may not have been able to participate today and others, and take that into account as you make that decision. Yeah. And again, this is no different than what was contemplated in the timeline and the plan, other than a couple of weeks sooner, which is fine. Every day matters, and let's not wait another day. Appreciate that. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there other questions regarding the referendum, either the plan, the substance of the issue, or others regarding the referendum from board members?
Mr. Chairman, I would just close, if this is appropriate, to really encourage the citizens of Gary to consider the fact that on average they're going to contribute and see the value in spending an extra 16 cents a day to take back their school. And with that, I'd like to make a motion, if it's appropriate.
Yeah, well, Wes, thank you. I think you're right. The value proposition here is a good one for the community. It's a small investment in the school corporation. It rights the ship financially. It allows the school to make investments in their teachers and in other needed programs at the district. And I think most importantly, to the business of this board and to all of the input that we've been receiving over the last several months, it is the fastest and most direct path to return the district to local control. There is no clearer path, and there is, in my mind, there is no path that will offer the same opportunity to enhance the academic offerings at the school and preserve the robust offerings at the school and continue the momentum that MGT has been able to gain over these last several years, and really carry it forward back to the community in better shape than they received it. I would entertain your motion.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Stress Unit Appeals Board, I would move we authorize Gary Community School Corporation to adopt a resolution to place a referendum question on the November 2020 ballot.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I will second, but I would like to have discussion on it.
Yes. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Joyce?
Yes. I would like to say that when we started this process, I believe that the referendum itself is an avenue that has to occur. That being said, I also think community involvement is the only way that success of the referendum can happen. And so I want to definitely encourage Eric, MGT, to have that discussion with the community, and not only with the community that already support the referendum, but those that maybe it's not necessarily that they fully oppose it, but they oppose parts of it or the rationale behind it. And so that people can have an understanding of what that rationale is and why it's important that the referendum occur so the children of Gary can get the proper education that they need. And I don't think anybody's going to argue the fact, and it was said a little bit earlier, I think, by Dr. Smith, and in not so many words, but the education of the kids in that community is the cornerstone of that community. And them having an education and an education system that provides opportunities for them to succeed, not only at the K-12 level, but at the next level, will help bring citizens to the community that can offer a lot of support, can move the community in different directions that an uneducated community can't. And to do that, they have to have proper funding. And, you know, the system was put into place following the property tax caps. And it was put into place so communities could step in and could provide more funding for their school corporations so they can provide the education that is needed, that they feel in the community for their children. And my own community 2 years ago had a $95 million referendum that they brought forward, and 95 other school corporations around here also had referendums for operating funds to move their school corporations forward. And I just want to say that I think that Gary needs to embrace the opportunity for an operating referendum, as was pointed out, at 16 cents a day, to move that cornerstone, help move that community forward and get the education they need. But I do feel that there are a lot of members of the community that just don't feel comfortable with it. And it's bringing those members up to speed, bringing those members to the forefront so the whole community can see why it benefits them. And not only because they have a kid that's in school, but it's because it's going to make Gary a better place to live. And that's why I'm going to vote for it. But I think, and I urge MGT to have that discussion with the community so they can be involved in the process, feel involved in the process, and ultimately will help move this forward to a definite win situation.
Paul, you're absolutely right. This has to be a community-led referendum. It has to be a partnership with the community, and I'm confident, based on all of the conversations that I've had with the team and with Eric on this topic, that they're going to do everything in their power to work with the community and come alongside the community to make this a community referendum. That this is not something that's imposed on the community, but it is something being offered as a solution for the community, not only to get out from under state control, but also to improve the academic opportunities of the district and to improve the school corporation as a whole and really move it forward into this next generation. Is there other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Courtney, would you please call the roll?
Yes. I'm going to vote yes, Mr. Chairman, and I would also add that I don't know what I can do besides what I'm doing today or what I can do as part of this forum, but I will certainly offer my assistance to Dr. Smith, Dr. McNulty, MGT, and the residents of Gary, if anything, to help this referendum, if they decide to go that way, be successful. I vote yes.
Tracy Brown
Yes.
and Justin McAdam.
Yes, but one additional point I'd like to make is that this is an opportunity for the community to show the leaders here at the state, to show the state legislature who really holds the ultimate decision-making power over the future of this district, that Gary Public Schools are a priority for the community and that they are something that the community wants to invest in and wants to see continue forward and grow as we head into the future.
All right. It was 4-0.
Great. Motion carries 4-0. Thank you. With that, we'll move to our next item of business. We have two really follow-up items from our prior meetings. The first is the consideration of the School Improvement Fund expenditure policy. This relates back to our last meeting when we talked about the School Improvement Fund and agreed that we would, Courtney would work to develop that policy in the meantime and bring that back to us for consideration. Courtney?
Yeah, absolutely. So the policy that you have drafted in front of you today is largely reflective of the conversation that we had at our last meeting on June 26th when we approved the loan suspension and essentially authorized Gary Schools to create the School Improvement Fund. What is in the policy is a situation where we would have Gary Schools provide us with a claims docket that would identify the expenditures or proposed expenditures from the fund that would come before DUAB for approval. DUAB would review that. In addition to the claims docket, we would also have Gary Schools provide us with the control document, I think is a word that Eric has been using, basically a document that would compare those actual expenditures to the estimated costs as originally presented in the plan. That control document in particular will also be made publicly available out on the Gary Schools webpage based on our conversation at our last meeting. So that would be available for folks to be able to track the progress. In addition to this, I have just added a little bit of additional language that we did talk through last time. This policy is specific to us approving the expenditures from the School Improvement Fund, but it does not supersede the contract approval and purchase approval processes that we currently have in place. So those would continue to still exist. Contracts or purchases above $30,000 would still come to either myself or DUAB for advanced approval before moving forward with those contracts. The other item that I had in here and something I would recommend for the purposes of the motion is kind of coming back to a comment that Mr. Joyce made last meeting. This is our first experience going into this level of detail on a particular fund for Gary Schools. And so while I have this policy drafted here, and I want to use that to kind of set the stage for moving forward, I do think that it is worthwhile for us to come back. I would say come back in at least 3 months, if not earlier, if we determine that it needs massaging. I think as we go through this process, we will learn more and more about exactly how to do this. So I just want to leave open that opportunity for us to amend this policy as needed. So I would recommend including that in the motion, would be that we would revisit this in 3 months or sooner to ensure that it's meeting our needs or make necessary modifications.
Thank you, Courtney. Are there questions from members regarding this policy or other comments? Just as if I could ask everyone to mute their microphones when they're not speaking, we are getting a little bit of feedback here. So Courtney, thank you for that. I appreciate the work you put into that, and I know you and Eric worked closely on this policy to ensure that it would be workable for both sides. And I think your recommendation to reconsider the policy in a few months is one that makes a lot of sense. This is new territory for us as a board, and there's probably going to be a little bit of a learning curve as we learn how to best facilitate this oversight. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the School Improvement Fund expenditure approval policy as presented and recommend that we revisit the policy in 3 months or sooner if needed and make adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and it's been seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Courtney, would you call the roll?
Yep. Paul Joyce,
Yes.
Wes Bennett,
Yes.
Tracy Brown,
Yes.
and Justin McAdam.
Yes.
4-0.
Motion carries 4-0. With that, our last item of business on the agenda today is a consideration of the public comment policy. You'll recall a couple meetings ago, we challenged Courtney to consider what a public comment policy could look like for this board and to work to develop one that would address many of the concerns that we've heard from the community about the desire to have a forum to speak to this board and raise concerns to this board, particularly around the Gary Community School process and oversight on a regular basis. And so I've worked with her. We've talked through this policy a number of times in the lead up to this, and I think she's done a great job. Courtney, would you mind presenting that for us?
Absolutely. So the public comment policy, as you have presented before you, I did pull on the public comment policies that are utilized by other state agencies, some other state boards, so really trying to be consistent with what folks may experience in other situations. I'll kind of walk through this just so we can lay this out in detail. So first and foremost, what we would have would be, we would ask that those who are interested in commenting would provide advance notice to the board. If we are holding in-person meetings, that would be done through a sign-in sheet, or if we are doing virtual meetings, we would do those either through an email message or a chat message to me as the host prior to the start of the meeting. That is consistent with how other boards have handled that in terms of ensuring that they know in advance who all would be looking to participate in the public comment period. Then from there, for individuals who are commenting, I've got here that public comments would be limited to 3 minutes in length. We would enforce those limits. Written comments can be provided, and those would also then be distributed to the board. We would restrict and say each individual would only have that opportunity to speak one time. Certainly for folks who have additional comments, I would then encourage them to submit written comments after the meeting that can be shared with the board. Comments would be directed to the board. Then statements that would be abusive or argumentative. And then this is a slightly different change compared to what you'll see in some other boards. I've also included a statement here that statements regarding personnel matters associated with a local government that is under the board's oversight, that those type of statements would not be entertained. And I think that is in keeping with typical practice at local governments and really at any entity of not discussing personnel matters. Not saying that those comments I would say would be best directed towards Gary Schools specifically in this case. So rather than having kind of personnel matters vented or discussed through the public comment period. Let's see, other than that, just provide some opportunities for the board chair to consider the comments. And depending on the agenda that is before DUAB for that particular meeting, would provide the opportunity for the board chair to provide an upper limit on the amount of time available for public comments. Again, we don't often have that lengthy of an agenda, but wanted to leave that flexibility in case we encounter that situation. This does still allow the DUAB the opportunity to hold a public hearing, as we have done in the past when we are specifically holding the meeting to take public comment. So that still would be an opportunity, but this would just establish a regular process for public comment at our DUAB meetings. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Courtney. Are there questions for Courtney regarding the public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I don't necessarily have a question, but I just comment that I think this captures the essence and the spirit of what we're trying to do, and I'm encouraged and certainly will support it.
Thank you, Wes. Other comments or questions from board members? All right. Courtney, thank you very much. It's a well thought out policy, and appreciate you turning it around so quickly for us in the midst of all the other things that we have going on at this moment. Courtney, one question just for the benefit of the public and those listening. When would the public comment policy as it's drafted now, when would be the first opportunity for someone to participate in public comment?
Assuming that this policy would be approved during today's meeting, then I would anticipate having an agenda item for public comment on our next DUAB meeting, so whenever that next meeting would be held.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, one question.
Yes, please.
Would that be at the end of the meeting after you've taken all of your actions, or would it be as you have a topic that there would be an opportunity for citizens to speak before you make a decision on a given topic?
Well, I'll speak to how I think it works then, maybe. What I anticipate, how I anticipate structuring this is that we would take the public comment at the beginning of the meeting. And that way, because we post our agenda online and it's known ahead of time what we will be talking about, it provides an opportunity for those commenters to speak to the individual issues that we will be considering, and ensure that we are able to take that into account as we make those decisions.
That's fine. I just didn't want it to be afterthought.
Right, exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I would move we approve the public comment policy as presented.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Courtney, would you call the roll?
Yep. Joyce?
Yes.
Wes Bennett?
Yes.
Tracy Brown?
Yes.
Justin McAdam?
Yes.
4-0.
Motion carries 4-0.
Mr.
That
Chairman,
concludes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
in behalf,
Representative Smith.
in behalf of this community, I would like to thank you for this resolution, this action that you just took. I'm not trying to gain any credit for this, but I'm sure you're aware that I've been pushing for this for years, that you allow the community to have some input, because you are indeed our school board now. So I just want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank Mr. Joyce and Mr. Bennett, because they have often voiced some of the concerns of our community. And I feel encouraged with the direction which the DUAB board is going. And I just want to thank you for the community.
Appreciate those comments, Representative Smith, and I do think you should take credit for it, because I've appreciated you continuing to push that issue, and I appreciate the conversations that you and I have had on many occasions about that, and I'm pleased with where we're going, and I think it's the right direction. That concludes our regular agenda for today. Is there any new business to come before the board today? Hearing none, we will adjourn, but before that, Courtney, would you provide your closing explanation?
Absolutely. Just wanted to remind everybody that as you log off of WebEx, you will likely receive a survey that will pop up. That survey is on the WebEx experience, not specific to DUAB. So if you do respond to that survey, that goes to WebEx and would not come to DUAB. So If you have comments that you would like to share with us, I would ask you to please reach out via email at duab@duab.in.gov. That's it.
Great, thank you, Courtney. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.